For those who missed the good old sword, shield, magic, and castle theme from the original Pillars of Eternity. For those who say Pillars 2 was better than its predecessor in every way. For those who like well-cooked mysteries with satisfying payoffs. For those who like WoW. For those of you who liked the eternal sunshine of a spotless mind.
I'm sorry, what?
For all those of you, there is the Forgotten Sanctum. Welcome to Ye Olde Entertainment. My name is Alex, and as you know, it is my duty, my mission, my purpose in life to help you decide whether that game that you have been thumbing for so long is indeed the right game for you or not. And today, I feel like we have a game that very much fits that bill for many, because some of you had already had your fill of Pillars 2 that fire by the time this DLC came out, and just said, nah, I'd rather play something else, something not Pillars of Eternity 2. Because some others had been enraptured with the story and setting in the original Pillars of Eternity, but were never quite thrilled with this mad hunt of a retconned Aethys or the colonial meets pirate themes of Pillars 2. Or simply because
enough is enough!
But if you need an excuse to revisit Pillars 2, or a little extra incentive to give it a shot for the first time, there is a DLC called The Forgotten Sanctum that comes packed with some of the best things the original game had to offer. All the goody user experience and top quality production values from Pillars 2, and a pretty decent high fantasy mystery driven plot holding it all together. And at the time I'm recording this video, there's a whopping discount of 75% on Steam for the complete edition of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. And that means that you can get the core game and all DLCs for just $15.
No! You asked too much.
But even at its regular price of $9.99, this purchase is a no-brainer for me. It's not perfect, of course, and we'll get around to that soon enough, but let's start at the beginning of the story, shall we? It is already a very good sign that this time you don't get a missive from a complete stranger who wishes you to go to the ass end of nowhere to deal with something that has nothing to do with your current, very dire predicament. At least, this time the interested party has the decency to drop down from the sky in a badass dragon to tell you about something that might turn out to be as problematic as this giant Adra statue you're chasing. And I'm talking problematic in the sense a normal grown-up person would, and not like they use the word in social media these days. As a matter of fact, this DLC, unlike the other DLCs in the series, acknowledges the gravitas of your main mission and makes clever use of it to add stakes to your quest, and it even throws a bit of moral dilemma your way. One that I was both very pleased and very surprised with. Magic is a running theme in the Forgotten Sanctum DLC. Locations are magical, the most important NPCs are archmages. There is something strange in the neighborhood. Who you gonna call? The Watcher! And it is all the product of magic. Hell, the game even recommends that you bring your wizard companions Aloth and Facina along for the ride. And for the most part, I think the devs nailed magic as a theme in this game. Not everyone gets magic right, let me tell you. Magic is powerful and fascinating, but it also has to have limitations. It has to adhere to a set of rules. And this set of rules should be clear to those who play the game, watch the film, or show. When these rules aren't respected, magic becomes trivial, plot convenient, and cheap. And we have seen this happen many, oh so many times before. This time at the behest of Archmages Lengrath and Tain, you have to seek out their fellow Archmage Mauda. So, the people some of our favorite spells are named after. I think that's kinda cool. There's even mention of Arkemir, and even Consulhaut might have a thing or two to say if you have already met him, defeated him, and turned him into your pet by the time you play this DLC. If you follow the game's recommendation and bring Facina with you, she has a thing or two to say about your mission and the characters you meet. Nothing she says is of critical importance, but unlike Constantine's pointless chatter in the Secret Slayer Survivor DLC, I feel like most of what she has to say adds to the immersion aspect of the game and the feeling of adventure. It's not like any of these NPCs were of critical importance in the core game up until that point, but there's mention of them in the original Pillars. There is a fairly lengthy mission that you can carry out for the Circle of Archmagi in Pillars 2, and you get to read about some of them in scripted events, and even meet some others face to face. This makes them feel like people that weren't pulled out of the writer's hat to act as quest triggers for the DLC. These people are already part of the game's lore. If you have been paying attention, you know that they are all known to have their own agendas, they are deceitful, duplicitous, even dangerous. And because of this, everything I did in this DLC by Lengrath's and Tain's request, I did with extreme caution and unease, and paying extra attention to my companions' opinions on whether or not I should trust these archmages on this or that. That's some proper role-playing right there. Now, Make no mistake about it, Maura is in this story to serve as the standard fair MacGuffin that you have to chase. And many half-assed expansion packs rely on this all-too-common plot device to push the story forward. And hey, I'd be the first one to immediately write off the story in a game and reroute my brain's already dwindling thinking power towards something more productive when a MacGuffin chase is presented to me as the thing I'm supposed to be interested in. But like we've said before in this channel, MacGuffin chases don't necessarily have to suck. Some are actually pretty fucking awesome. And I wouldn't say that Maura as a MacGuffin was pretty fucking awesome here, but there was something mysteriously disturbing and disturbingly mysterious about her intentions that piqued my interest. And no, it had nothing to do with the fact that she was into tentacles. I'm not that kind of pervert. But there was something that led me to believe that whatever she was after was important, or dangerous, or something that I had to concern myself with. And that's because the game made it abundantly clear that whatever Maura was after had to do with the very location in which the story takes place. And like Gotham in Batman lore, or Martinet in Disco Elysium, the setting in the Forgotten Sanctum DLC is a character. And a very important character. Actually, this character and the way you end up dealing with it, please give me a thumbs up if you appreciate the efforts I'm putting into not spoiling the living shit out of this one, may potentially have a huge impact on the game's main mission. As the protagonist of the main story, and given the larger-than-life mission that has been bestowed upon you, you are faced with an interesting moral dilemma near the end of the DLC. There is a very high-risk, high-reward path that you can follow that may potentially be extremely beneficial for your main mission, or completely disastrous for the whole of Eora if it goes south. And while the writers more or less tried to sell you that something very grave could potentially occur should you take the wrong decision or fail your mission in the Beast of Winter and the Seeker Slayer Survivor DLC, the Forgotten Sanctum expansion pack is the only one that actually succeeds in painting the prospect of a very immediate, very serious consequence should things not go according to the plan. There is also a very interesting moral dilemma in a quest that has to do with restoring the memories of some prisoners who had turned into mindless husks through some very nasty parasitical magic for some utterly nefarious purpose, that I am also not going to spoil here. And that is uncharacteristically dark and creepy compared to the rest of the things you face in Pillars 2, but it's also pretty fucking awesome. Now that I think of it, the rest of the game never made me ponder the morality of my actions. I had never been forced to walk a path of shades of grey before in Pillars 2. I mean, you can do evil things for your own gain in many situations, but the good and evil things that you can do were always presented in a cut and dry way. For example, if you are a good guy and you sympathize with a certain faction, you are still not going to blow up an entire building and kill hundreds just because they say so. That's clearly an evil thing to do. But in this DLC, I wasn't always sure what the good guy thing to do was, and that is awesome. These shades of grey and moral dilemmas go a long way when it comes to keeping you invested in what's going on in a game's world. Especially if these shades of grey and dilemmas involve your character and his or her predicament. But if you like a good moral dilemma or two, I encourage you to check out Thronebreaker. Now, of course it helps that people aren't forthcoming about what they really want, because they're interested in using you to their own end, and also that the truth is always obfuscated by some weird magic. And all of this is wild at its best. Even the story in this game seems to have been written by WoW, and I think this is brilliant. But there was a major wasted opportunity here in my opinion. The Archmages Tain and Lengroth both want you to find Maura, and they both want you to do something about the main threat in the game's story. I'm calling it that in the interest of keeping things spoiler-free, but Lengroth and Tain have very different ideas about how you should undertake these mission objectives. And this takes me back to the original Myst game and its two main villains, Cirrus and Akinar. These guys have become trapped within two separate magical books, and they try to convince you to help them escape their predicament, but interestingly, they also seem very eager to convince you that the other brother is the evil one. And this of course gives you the distinctive feeling that there is something that they aren't telling you. But Cirrus and Akinar have a very good reason to cajole you into helping them. They are condemned to a life of imprisonment with no possibility of redemption. Even when you find out that they are both huge bastards, you can't help but feel sorry for the guys. This situation is made even more interesting due to the fact that the only way in which they can save themselves is by fucking you over. And the writers here could have easily done something similar with Tain and Lengroth, and they could have done so without sacrificing the main premise of the story or even the side missions. But as it is, there's nothing personal at stake for these two. Sure, they are worried about the potential destruction of a part of the world or the loss of knowledge that may come out of your dealings with the game's main entity, but it always feels like it's professional curiosity for them. And they are of course competing for you to favor their approach, but their differences come off as almost friendly rivalry. I can't help but feel they could have done so much more with these two. And speaking of things they could have done so much more with, combat in this game is not quite up to par with everything else this DLC has to offer. It's better than in the Beast of Winter expansion pack, but not quite as good as in the Seeker Slayer Survivor DLC in my opinion, but let's get into why that is. You do have some new enemies, and many of them rank very freaking high in the creep factor. And there are interesting fights here and there, some of which even have faces a la World of Warcraft. And figuring out some of these fights is as fun as it's always been in this franchise. But see, the story in this DLC isn't all that long. It feels like a longer, more urgent, more interesting than usual quest. And while some locations are quite impressive, they are not that big either. And that's why I get the feeling that at some point, the developers felt like their third expansion was coming off as a little too short and lacking in content. And it seems like their solution to make the game longer was to clutter up the DLC with a lot of copy-paste combat encounters and a lot of damaged spongy enemies.
Not a great plan.
This was already a problem in the Beast of Winter DLC, and I think it's even worse here. Take for example these cocoons, these spider nests. There is a shit ton of them. You may skip them, but they can become a pain in the ass if you do. So chances are you'll end up taking all of them out. And for all, and I do mean all of these combat encounters, I did the exact same thing. I had my tank walk up to the nest and bust it open, and then I had the rest of my party members summon their minions and let their minions attack the swarm. And I literally just sat back and waited for the fight to be over. And then you have these guys, these walking enchanted armors. The first time you encounter this bunch, they may give you a teeny tiny bit of trouble, until you figure out how to deal with them. But you fight this group of enemies not once, but 3 or 4 times. The thing is that once you figure out this fight, it becomes a non-challenge, and the fight itself is almost exactly the same as the fight against the swarm of bugs we just talked about. So, just do the same 2 things every time and sit back and wait for the fight to be over. The first time you encounter these luminous fungi, they'll probably give you a fair bit of trouble. I even had to load a saved game a couple of times and change my party members. I was even proud when I finally beat them. The problem is that you get almost this exact same group of enemies 3 more times, and again, once you figure out this fight, it ceases to have any secrets and it just becomes a bore. And this happens even in the highest difficulty level. There were a couple of very cool boss fights in this DLC, especially because they were different from anything Pillars 2 had thrown at me up until that point, except the mega bosses of course. But both during the good and the bad boss fights, I never felt like I was going to lose at any point. And I remember getting this same feeling back in the day when I played this DLC for the first time. And yet, these fights took forever because the enemies had a ridiculous amount of health. Combat in the Forgotten Sanctum expansion pack feels fresh, new, and exciting at times, but repetitive and slow at others. If they had only kept the good combat encounters, this DLC would have been pretty close to perfection. There are a few other things that I wasn't all that crazy about in this expansion pack. The Baldur's gaiety and humor remarks that were also a thing in Beast of Winter are back this time, more over the top than ever. And the reason I don't like them is that they weren't a thing from the get-go in the core game. You do have humorous dialogue options in the core game, but they are not in the same league as this, so lines like these feel a little bit off character this far into the game. Also, some expressions and dialogue lines sound anything but medieval fantasy. And there are a few surprise motherfucker Wile Coyote style traps, as there were in Beast of Winter, but this is not nearly as annoying as it was in that DLC. But these are all minor nitpicks of course. You can tell that there was passion put into this DLC. Look at this location. Look at this creature and pay attention to the moment of the story in which it makes an appearance. Look at the character model for this boss. There is a nicely written scripted event that sort of ushers you into the DLC's theme of magic as you explore the outer reaches of the Sanctum. The locations in the DLC are interconnected in Dark Soulish interesting ways. For the first time in the entire series, there is a proper stealth section that is fun to play as a stealth section, that you can also go on about in the typical impatient, fuck this shit, let's kill everyone way. The game even acknowledges your past decisions in both Pillars 2 and the first game. If you are romantically involved with Maya, for example, the game throws a little something at you. If you have already defeated Console Hout by the time you do this DLC, the game has a little something to reward you with. If you did Wild's bidding in the first game instead of bringing the scroll back to the Dwarf Grimda, the game has a little something to offer. And in my book, those are the best little treats a game can give. So before I end this video with a recommendation, I think you saw that one coming, I'll list here some of the decisions made by the devs that I think ultimately made of this DLC the best of the three. 1. Unlike the other 2 expansion packs, in Forgotten Sanctum, the people who seek you out and ask for your help are already a part of the game's lore, and this adds to the immersion aspect of the story. 2. Unlike the other 2 expansion packs, your interest in seeing this mission through to the end has to do with your main quest in some capacity, regardless of whether it ends up helping you or not. 3. They decided to take on the theme of magic, and they nailed it. It's consistent throughout every location, situation, plot point, and character, and it is respectful of its own rules. 4. The game acknowledges your past decisions even if this acknowledgement does not have too much of an impact and is presented as tiny little treats. 5. It has stealth sections, boss fights, enemies, locations like we have never seen up until this point, and this makes this DLC feel like a proper turn of the wheel for the core game. 6. Facina finally gets a chance to shine. So for the price the entire game is currently going for, this purchase is absolutely a no-brainer, but even if you have to pay full price for it, if you were pondering whether or not to dive on into Pillars 2 for the first time, or if you need further incentive to revisit it, this DLC might just be the little push you need. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you're seeing in this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.